And right now it's time for that time when we have our special guest. Tonight's special guest is Ralph Cohen. Ralph is a comedian, Compere, and like many New Zealand entertainers, left for the bigger and greener pastures of Australia. Back in New Zealand for the Benny Awards, Ralph paid a visit to The Beat Goes On for a catch-up. We welcome Ralph Cohen as our special guest on The Beat Goes On. Ralph Cohen, welcome to The Beat Goes On.
Thank you. This has always been a dream of mine to get here. Well,
to The Beat Goes On or to
really.
New Zealand?
No, The Beat Goes On. The Beat Goes On. No, I still try and come back to New Zealand at least once a year.
You ever think to yourself, I should have stayed in New Zealand, what a great country, why didn't I stay?
I agree with all of that, and the reason that I left, well, the first time I went to Australia was actually in 1968. Then I came back, then I went back in 69 and ended up in the Don Lane Tonight Show in Brisbane. Try Sydney. Then I went to Adelaide for a year, then I came back. So through the 70s I was here. 1980 I actually got a job in Hawaii, in Honolulu. And I flew over there for the job, and I'd been there about 3 weeks when it turns out that the guy who'd asked me to go and work for him couldn't get me a green card, so I couldn't stay there. And then I met some local mafia people who could get me a green card.
It all starts, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is true. This is a true story. And they said, let us know tomorrow if you want us to get you a green card. Didn't quite say it like that, but that sort of thing. So the next day I said, thank you very much, but no thank you. And they said, why not? And I said, I don't want to owe you a favour. And they said, you're a clever man. So 1980 was kind of when I moved over.
Now, Ralph, you've made a living as a comedian. And when you decided to become a comedian, there weren't that many comedians around. It wasn't like the industry that it is today.
Oh,
is it?
goodness me, no way.
What gave you the resilience, the strength, and the belief in yourself to carve out a career as a comedian?
The thing is, when you're doing stand-up, today or way back then when, you know if it's not working. And if it's not working, you can't turn to the band leader and say, okay, let's do this song now. Here we go, make a bit of noise. You are up there and touch wood, somewhere there's wood here or there. Very, very seldom did I ever not go over with an audience. I had a few close calls, but I did have one or two times. I can remember one particular club in Sydney when I used to work the clubs, and it didn't matter what I did there, it just wasn't going to work. The sound system was against me the first time. Second time, they actually said to me, we're going to invite you back because the PA was so bad. Second time I went back, good PA, I was bad. So it didn't work, you know. I really didn't think I could sing well enough. And in the days when I started, if you were an MC or a compere, you were either a singing compere or you tried to be a compere comedian. So I went with a comedy. Also I discovered quite easily, again this was kind of pre-television even here, that a lot of the comedians in the world, particularly in America, were Jewish. And I happen to be Jewish, so therefore I was able to borrow some of the style off them and a lot of jokes off them and rewrite them for myself. So that's kind of what got me into it in the beginning.
What's the funniest joke in the world, Ralph?
I have no idea. I probably haven't heard it yet. I probably haven't heard it. Look, it depends on how you tell them. The only thing I say about today's comics, and I haven't seen all the local ones at all, is I wish they wouldn't use what we call bad language. Because to me it's not funny. It doesn't make a gag funny just to use a word that's going to shock everybody. If you're a good comic, you should be able to do the joke, get the laugh, move on to the next one.
If you were in a situation, you were comparing a show and something went wrong, how long could you go with all the accumulated material over all those years? How long do you think you could go before you finally said, look, I've just exhausted my repertoire? Because one gag can tend to remind you of another, it could be a couple of 3 hours. Really? You have that much material? Well, I would have, yeah. And very briefly, if I may for a moment, Wellington Town Hall, I can't remember the year, 2 shows we were doing. The opening act was a guy called Paul Jones. It was the original lead singer with Manfred Mann. Remember Manfred Mann from England? I was the stage manager and I wasn't supposed to do anything on the show. It was a Harry M. Miller production. 5 to 6, we get a phone call. The taxi hadn't picked up Paul Jones from the hotel. I've got a make-up band on stage behind me. I can still remember the piano player was a guy called Brian Henderson that used to be in the Carlisles in those, or earlier than that. And I said, play something. So they played a make-up number. Then I came back on stage and I said, play some more. And they said, we can't, we don't have any charts. We never met each other until tonight, blah, 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 blah. So I turned to the audience, I can still remember this. I had jeans on and a t-shirt,
And I said, okay folks, there's been a problem. Paul Jones, the opening act tonight, is still at the hotel. The taxi didn't bother going in to pick him up. And of course the whole place went, because they knew about Wellington taxis. Now I said, you've got two choices. You can sit there and talk to yourselves, or you can shut up and I'll tell you some jokes. And believe it or not, they went dead quiet. So I started doing a cabaret act to a town hall full of young people. And it actually worked. And eventually the piano player, Brian, gave me a nod and a whistle to let me know Paul had arrived, and I introduced him and got off stage. And the reason I remember it so vividly is that unbeknownst to me, at the back of the room was two of the directors of Radio Hauraki, which was still a pirate station out on the ship. And they came back at interval and said to me, congratulations. And I said, why? They said, when you told that room full of kids that you were going to tell them jokes, we thought you were going to get murdered. We thought they'll be ripping you off the stage and throwing you away. So I believe if you tell an audience what's going on, then
they'll work with you.
They'll work with you, yeah. I can remember the Auckland Town Hall, I can't remember what show, and two of the amplifiers blew up just as the big actors coming on stage. So they went off stage till we got replacements. Now again, I told the audience, I said, this is what's happened, and they accepted it. So it's better than trying to hide stuff from people, because they're not silly.
From a baby boomer point of view, from our generation, you were in a great space here in New Zealand, looking at our heritage of baby boomer entertainment. There were golden years, weren't there, in New Zealand?
Yeah.
So, and you knew all the early entertainers, didn't you? What was it? What was it like back then?
Well, I really started in the early '60s. So yes, I met a lot of the ones from the '50s who were still performing. Herman and the Carlyles. Well, I still see Herman today, as I mentioned before to you. His cousin Freddie Kyle and the Cavaliers. People like Ricky May were just starting, and I've got too many stories for the amount of time we got about Ricky May, because him and I spent a little time in London together. A beautiful man, and a great pity when he passed on. International acts that I worked with, mainly through Harry Miller's New Zealand man, a guy called Anthony Hollows. I did 2 tours with Shirley Bassey. I did The Animals, Eric Burdon and The Animals. I toured with The Who, The Small Faces, Paul Jones, I mentioned before, Tom Jones. Probably the biggest name I toured with was the Rolling Stones. And
these are great names, aren't they?
They are, yeah. And if you ask any of those acts today who Ralph Cohen is, they wouldn't have a clue. And Frankie Valli, who's coming back shortly.
Yes, exactly.
At the Auckland Town Hall, I remember that.
What were you like as a young man? Did you have lots of energy? Were you ambitious? What did you want most of all as a young man?
Gee, that's a good question. I wish I could answer it easily. My older brother could probably tell you that, but he wouldn't stop talking. I seem to remember that I always enjoyed making people laugh, even at school. When I was at Mount Albert Grammar, I remember getting caned once. I think it was only once, and I think it was because I made a quip in the classroom which made everybody laugh except the teacher. So I took that as well when I went into comedy. I thought, well, I like people laughing. It's good. It makes me feel good. It makes them feel good, and therefore maybe if I can make a living out of it.
In a nutshell, that era. I mean, I caught the tail end of it. It seemed very exciting to me at that young age. So, and you were right in the thick of it. Could you write a book about all those wonderful days? I mean,
I suppose you could. I never really
stories
thought of it.
that you.
There's lots of stories. Yeah. You know, when I first went to Sydney, no, second time I was in Sydney, I think, 1969. I was working as a waiter at the Silver Spade at the Chevron Hotel, which was the main showroom in Sydney in those days. And I went to do a show in a suburban club. And the star of the show was a guy that was on a police show, but he was also an opera singer, Norman Yem. And Norman's manager came up to me after the show and said, you are very, very funny and you're very, very clean. I was always clean. And he said, I think how would you like to work at the Chevron Silver Spade? And I said, I already do. He said, what? Where? I said, I'm a waiter there. he thought I was joking, see? Anyway, he said, an Canadian-American, Robert Goulet, you know that name?
Yes, I do.
He said, he's coming in 4 weeks' time, and he said, he's a very good personal friend of mine, and if I can get you on with him for 2.5 weeks, can I sign you to me and I'll be your agent? You know, I said, yeah, sure. He'd never say no to anybody. Anyway, blow me down, he did. He knew Robert Goulet. He met him at the airport in the limo. As they drove into Robert's hotel, he said, look, you know, I need a favour. I've got this guy, he's from New Zealand, he's young, he's very funny, I want him to open your show. And Robert Goulet said, yeah, okay, fine, you know, unless if he's real bad, we'll do one opening and he's gone. And I got 2.5 weeks work out of that, which was very good. Bob Rogers was doing a television show in Sydney. Every time anyone rang up to put me on a show, microphone again, he would say, no, we don't have locals. And he said, he's not a local, he's from New Zealand. He said, every second act in Sydney's from New Zealand, which they were, because all the Maori show bands were there. Ricky May was there, etc. Anyway, he was at the opening night of the Goulet show, came backstage, shook my hand and said, I want you on my show. So I did his show once a fortnight for about the next 10 or 12 weeks. So funny things can happen.
That's how it all started.
It all started. Briefly to finish that sort of era for you, because you're saying how exciting it could have been, the man who was the main man at the Chevron Hotel in Sydney in those days, I can't remember his name so I won't get it wrong, his office was behind the office of the person I dealt with. And he was directly connected to the mob in Las Vegas in America. And he said to me, how would you like to go and work in Vegas? Well, I mean, that's a dream for anybody, right?
Say yes to everyone.
Yeah, so he sent me to Melbourne for 2 weeks with an American Filipino girl singer. When you come back, we'll talk about it. When I got back, he's in hospital, he'd had a heart attack. He didn't die, but he was in hospital for weeks, so the last thing he wanted to do was remember someone like me. Yeah. I did get to Vegas, but only as a tourist.
Now, Ralph, you're in the Gold Coast at the moment. Thousands of New Zealanders are all leaving this country for Australia. You did it in 1918. Would you recommend doing it?
Would I recommend it?
Is it a good life over there?
We have a very good life over there, but we've lived there a long time now. And apparently, from what I've been told, there's a lot more work available in Australia, particularly in the mines and areas like that, very high-paying work. Apparently, again, from what I've seen and been told, the average wage in New Zealand is $4 or $5 an hour less than it is over there. But some things are dearer. I mean, you know, foodstuffs can be dearer, petrol's cheaper right now. So you've really got to take an individual case. It's easy to get there, so get over there to Queensland or New South Wales or Victoria. Have a look for a job. If you can get a job, try it out. If you like it, then bring the rest of the family. I wouldn't say everybody jump in a bandwagon and go straight over there.
We're going to have to wrap it up. We've run out of time, but Ralph, I'm going to say you are part of our baby boomerhood heritage. You were right there when we were starting to grow up, 16, 17, 18, 19, and you were performing, and we remember you well.
Well, I think that's wonderful.
Wonderful to have you back in New Zealand on a Baby Boomer Chat Show.
That's what it is. Okay. Thanks, Eric. Great to talk.
Thank you, Ralph. Bye.